Hello Serie A fan. When it rains, it pours, but does it affect the scores? Juve, Milan, Napoli and Inter all pick up points in adverse conditions, while Sassuolo hold Roma to a soggy draw in the capital. Meanwhile, Monza signed Balotelli, but step aside wagon for Christie. Football has a new favourite detective, Magnum P.Ihajlovic. All that and more in this episode of Scudetto. Hello and welcome to the pod. We are creeping ever closer to Christmas and to the eventual winter break. And as Boaz said earlier, the top four is starting to look somewhat familiar, although the order not so much. Milan staying 5 points clear, chased by Inter, then Napoli, then Juventus. We'll get into that in a bit more detail shortly. But first, let's crack open some civilized beers. I've kicked off the Christmas spirit with a Christmas beer, a Merry Christmas IPA, which turns out to be a red ale. Can's quite festive, but it's a bit bitter for my liking.
Your face tells a completely different story, by the way.
That's a diplomatic review.
It's not a festive face.
If this beer company plans to sponsor us, it's great, but your face says something else.
I haven't even told you where it's from. It's wow, where is it? It says on it, ho 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 from Isalmi. I guess it's from Isalmi. Yeah. Baz, have you got a Christmas beer? I know you picked up some festive looking ones in your 10 last week.
I've kept my Christmas beers for later on in the month, but this can looks slightly festive, and it kind of tickled my fancy. It's a New England IPA collaboration between Brewdog and Cloudwater, and I'm sure it's going to be amazing.
Kenny, I understand you've failed to source an original beer this evening.
Yeah, I've done a Boaz here. I've got a beer that I've already had, and I was going to try and pass it off as if it was a new one. As Boaz said, all these beers are kind of named from someone looking through a thesaurus anyway. But I'm back to the rock and roll, the rich smoky porter from Wuha. I don't really drink many porters, but I quite enjoyed it last time. So yeah, see how I feel about it second time around.
Good stuff. Maybe it'll grow on you. Maybe this IPA will grow on me by the end of the podcast as well. Anyway, let's talk about the football. Juve creeping into the top four with a 2-1 win over Torino. Although, Kenny, you were just telling me if the season were to end now, they'd actually finish third because obviously Serie A operates on the head-to-head rule. And obviously there was that game against Napoli where they were awarded the default.
Yeah, and it was actually in the Gazzetta today or yesterday, I think it was, that you guys mentioned that it was a familiar look to it, but this would be the first time since 2002, 2003 that those three clubs had been in the top three. So maybe not that familiar.
It's crazy to think about that it's been so long.
Yeah.
Anyway, in the actual game, it was a bit of a scare for Juve, wasn't it? Buzz came back from behind. Good result in the end, obviously, but they didn't look certain by any means.
Definitely, and just the fact that they needed the 90th minute goal from Bonucci says a lot, because this is a game that Juve normally dominate. For me, there has not been much of an evolution in terms of play since Pirlo's taken over. And it always feels like it's 2 steps forward and 2 steps back. Besides a few sparse games right at the start of the season, maybe Sampdoria comes to mind. I can't really think of a time when we figured, okay, this is Pirlo's identity. This is how he wants his team to play. In this case, Bonucci and McKinney came to the rescue, but that's not always going to be the case.
Yeah, and you mentioned Bonucci coming to the rescue. He would agree with your analysis, I think, wouldn't he, Kenny? He had some quite harsh words to say about how you've played.
Yeah, it's quite a thing, really, to have a senior member a very senior member of the playing staff come out and say what he said. He basically came out and said he wasn't happy at all with these seesaw performances and seesaw results. Said that when they came out at the beginning, they weren't switched on at all. They were losing every challenge. They were losing every second ball. There were misplaced passes, and basically saying that it wasn't acceptable. And that what they showed in the second half should be what they're basically showing from the beginning. That's what he expects. He didn't mince his words. He was very, very critical, in particular, of that first half performance.
And I think the results kind of prove him right, because if you look at their last 5 games, they've not managed to get 2 wins in a row. It's win, draw, win, draw, win, draw. And even in the games that they do win, you get the feeling that they're not really performing at the level that you expect of a team like Juventus. But then you have this crazy stat that Pirlo is the first manager since the 3 points were introduced in Italy to not to be unbeaten in his first 10 games.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. And as we mentioned at the top of the show, I mean, Juventus are, despite all their shortcomings, they're just 6 points off the top. So it's a very close league, and I think they have too much quality in that side not to kick on and start putting in real performances.
Yeah, I would actually say, I mean, you mentioned a couple of other players coming to the rescue. I think we have to talk about how good Cuadrado has been. He's been the one shining star. He's been possibly the best right back in Serie A, really. And yeah, he's been the one that's just been turning in performance after performance. Even Cristiano Ronaldo on this occasion didn't shine particularly. So they need to get the performances that you would expect out of the players that they have. The players that they have available to them, really, because they should be neck and neck with Milan, really, with the amount they spend on their squad.
And we should spend some words about Torino as well, because they're having a really shocking time of it right now. If I read a stat this week that if matches lasted 45 minutes, Torino would be in second spot. As things stand, they're in 18th. You have to wonder what's going on there. Why is there a mental issue that they can't bring games to a victory? And also the fact that Cairo came out this week and said that he's fully supporting Gianpaolo and that he's going to renew Belotti's contract for many, many years. That sounds a little bit like a vote of confidence to me.
Yeah, and another interesting one on Torino, actually, that I was reading was that the last time they were relegated at this stage in the season, they actually had 2 more points than they currently do. So definitely worrying times for them. And I would say that they've kind of taken over from where Iachini's Fiorentina left off, of going in front and then just getting scared and kind of bringing on their own demise, really.
Yeah, and just last point on Juve, just before we move on, we're facing Barca in the Champions League this week. Bit of a dead rubber as far as the group goes. I mean, they've almost certainly both qualified, but it could be the last time that Messi faces Ronaldo. Obviously, there's no guarantee of that, but with both of them getting on, they're not playing in the same league. Possibly something to look out for. And speaking of these two clubs, I think Boaz might have an update for us on the Suarez passport situation.
I don't have an update per se. I just know that there's new evidence and that the director of the university where Suarez took his hypothetical test has been suspended for 8 months. As far as Juventus's involvement goes, apparently Paratici was in touch with the university to find out when the test could be taken and stuff like that. But whether he knew that this was going to be behind the back deal, I'm not sure, and I guess we'll find out as time goes by. But anyways, it's this case that we mentioned a few weeks ago that it seemed to have disappeared has suddenly caught a bit of steam.
Yeah, for anyone who doesn't remember, this was when Juventus were looking to sign Suarez, obviously have a quota for the number of players from outside of Italy or outside of the European Union they can sign. And it looked like they were trying to get Suarez a passport with maybe a slightly dodgy language test.
I think we mentioned at the time that Suarez is also eligible for a Spanish passport, for which he does qualify. So that whole saga was a little bit of a weird one. I guess we'll keep our listeners updated if and when new stuff comes out.
Right, let's talk about your favourite topic, Buzz. Milan with another win, as we said in the intro. Obviously, still 5 points clear at the top. People have been asking questions around the squad depth of Milan, but they managed to get a win here without Kier, Benacer, or Zlatan. Positive sign.
Definitely a positive sign, and one of those victories where it shows character. The team didn't play too well. Sampdoria threatened quite often, considering. And I mean, statistically, the fact that Milan haven't lost in so long, sooner or later, this beautiful period will have to end. So every game I'm preparing myself for that inevitable moment. But so far, Milan truck on. And with Kier and Zlatan, who are the team's elder statesmen, missing. You have an average age of 22, which is, again, it was already the lowest in Europe, and obviously that brings it down a fair bit. And you have to say that the players that are coming on, whether they're starting or whether they're coming off the bench, like Haug did in this game, they're really making an impression. Their decision making has been really splendid, and there's been some great goals. Particularly the second goal from Milan, it's worth watching because there's a lot of nice interplay, and Castillejo manages to score with his first touch on the ball, which is always a nice thing. Other than that, I guess I have to open a parenthesis that Milan were given yet another penalty. Obviously, I'm a Milan fan, so I have absolutely no issue with that, but in my mind, none of the penalties that were given were particularly outrageous, with the exception of the penalty given against Roma, which was a bit of a joke. But by the rules of the game, this particular penalty was a handball. And if you dislike the handball rule, that's a different story. But this is the rule that we're playing with right now. As I said earlier, Sampdoria really threatened. They had a clear header in the 94th minute, and it could have gone their way. Sampdoria haven't won since the 24th of October, so they're also a team they play some decent football, and Candreva seems to be getting some great crosses in after being a little bit maligned at Inter. But as I said, their form isn't delivering.
Yeah, Kenny, you mentioned a few weeks ago about Sampdoria, and they've been on a bit of a bad run ever since then. Do you agree with Boaz? They got a bit unlucky in this one?
Yeah, I mean, arguably Milan should have had the game out of sight, though. I think Ranieri said as much as well afterwards, and all credit to Ranieri for changing it in the second half. But I mean, I would like to mention the great evolution of Frank Kessie, who's beginning to look like the player that Milan thought they were getting when they signed him from Atalanta. I think I spoke last week, or it might have been on the previous pod before that one, about the impact that Ibrahimovic and Pioli as well, we've got to say, have had on Leao and how his transformation is going. But Kessie as well, I mean, he's not just becoming an integral part of the team, but he's becoming one of the leaders. I mean, he also isn't just about that sort of physicality, which is, I think, what a lot of us, well, not a lot of us, but what a lot of people kind of see in him. But he's just really integral to them sort of transitioning into, from defense into attack. He's looking great.
He scored the penalty as well, so that's one area they certainly won't be missing.
Yeah.
And we spoke about last week about the Milan penalties, and I mentioned that someone should just blast them. And Frank Kessie took his penalty, and one of those ones where he watches the goalkeeper until the goalkeeper takes a dive and then places it on the other side, which is designed to give me a heart attack. I think we should just close this chat about this game by saying that Milan conceded yet another goal off a set piece, this time off a corner. But something that I found kind of comical was that obviously the referees have a watch that tells them if the ball passed the line. But even though the ref had already assigned the goal, the Sampdoria players were still complaining that it was a goal, and he kept showing them. He was like, "This, it's on the watch. It's okay. But it crossed the line. But it's on the watch. But it's crossed."
He didn't point to the center circle, did he? Like normally,
he just pointed to his watch constantly, and
he was just holding his hand up in the air. I could see why they were confused.
Yeah, I know, but he was telling them face to face, "Hey, it's okay. I've given you the goal," and they were shouting, very angry.
Yeah, it was quite a bizarre moment.
I liked it.
Anyway, we're sticking in Milan there was a bit of bad weather in the area, actually, wasn't there, Buzz? I think some of the games were called off. Neither of these.
Yeah, I think it's a good chance to give a dishonorable to something that's out of our control, like the weather. But this week in particular, Serie A was really badly hit. The Atalanta game was called off. The Napoli game was played in what looked like a lot of puddles. And also, a few of the other games were in pretty shoddy conditions. So again, what can you say? It's out of our control. And in a season where we can't really postpone games and we don't have the luxury, it's kind of it's problematic.
I wouldn't think Gasperini would necessarily think it's problematic coming just before the crucial Ajax game in the Champions League for Atalanta. But yes, I absolutely take the point.
He's out there with the water cannons.
Yeah.
Anyway, it didn't affect Inter, who beat Bologna 3-1, and it was actually a very good performance.
It was an impressive performance all around, and it felt like Inter were returning to the form that they showed towards the end of last season when they reached the Europa League final, and also put a big fight for the league. I think that the Conte has kind of given up temporarily, at least, on his vision of attacking football for something that's a little bit more defensively solid. And in Hakimi, I was texting you guys during the game and saying, I'm not sure what position this guy is playing in, because he kept finding himself one-on-one with the keeper. And he got 2 goals in the end, but he could have had another couple. He gets to make these runs because of the formation, because Brozovic is dropped a little bit further back, or whoever plays in that position in the game. And I think it's a tactical masterstroke from Conte. So it's a feel-good story from Inter all around, or is it?
Yeah, a bit of a strange one though, isn't it? Kenny, you say it's a tactical masterclass from Conte, Baz, but wasn't Conte complaining about Hakimi not being good enough going backwards?
Yeah, he was. He was saying, that a few weeks back that he needed to work on his defensive attributes when people were questioning why Hakimi had all this money spent on him and wasn't in the starting 11. But then after this game, Conte said Hakimi has all of the tools available to him. So long as he has this team and this manager, he can become one of the best in the world at his position. So tooting his own horn there, I think. But to come back to something that Boaz alluded to, the fact that Conte does seem to have settled on a bank of 3 really in midfield. I think the experiment with the one attacking player behind the 2 strikers is maybe finished, and I think that suits the type of football that Conte wants to play. But I think that it spells trouble for another topic which I know is on our agenda, which is a certain Mr. Eriksen.
I mean, we've been debating for, I don't know, at least the last 2, maybe 3 weeks whether we should talk about Eriksen. Conte's kind of made it impossible for us to avoid really subbing him on with 1 minute to play. I mean, maybe there's an argument that he needs to put him in the shop window, remind people that he's there, but it just seems a bit disrespectful to me. I don't know what you made of that, Baz.
I think that it's really disrespectful, and it kind of puts a dampener on the whole game. As I said, Inter played phenomenally. They showed some great spirit. They finally expressed Conte's vision of football. And then he brings on a player who cost a lot of money, who's earning a lot of money. He's not some kid from the Primavera. And he brings him on in the 91st minute after he'd brought him on in the past few games in the 87th minute, 86th minute. And this is just posturing, and it's kind of pointless. It puts a spotlight on something that's completely off topic, and then Conte also is the one who gets annoyed when he's asked about this by the media. So he's kind of setting himself up in a trap.
Yeah, I think it's something that we've said before. This Conte system doesn't suit Eriksen. He's found himself in completely the wrong team for his for all of his all of his best attributes. Really, I do feel like it's a bit insulting to Eriksen the way he's brought on with minutes left to play. I have read various suggestions that there could be something contractual that is the reason he's coming on, but I'm sure there's nothing in his contract that says that he can't be trusted to play for more than 5 minutes at a time.
And it's interesting you say that, because Inter obviously are playing Shakhtar in the midweek in what is a must-win game, and with Vidal dropping out due to injury, you'd think that Eriksen might get a look in, but no, Gagliardini is going to play.
Yeah. So anyway, it looks very likely that he's going to be on the move in January. Hearing some interesting things. Maybe he'll be back in the Premier League, perhaps a replacement for Mesut Ozil at Arsenal. But perhaps most relevantly for this podcast, Baz, rumours that he could be switching clubs in Milan.
I mean, every few weeks there's rumours about Hakan Calhanoglu's agent asking for €6 million, €5.5 million, €7 million. And also, there's constantly this agent is constantly putting out rumors that Man United and Liverpool and Tottenham are all interested. And but the latest rumor to come out of the Italian press is that there might be a straight swap between Milan and Inter for their Fantasisti. I'm not sure how much truth there is to this story, and I'm not really sure if either team truly benefits from the swap. But I think all Eriksen needs is a change of atmosphere. And so I personally wish him all the best. I can't wait to see him play again. I think this whole situation has become a bit ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, Kenny mentioned it when we were discussing off air, but it'd probably be difficult contractually given the wages that Eriksen's on. That said, to watch him feeding Zlatan would be a prospect indeed.
And of course, he'd be with his great mate, Kjaer, who apparently he talks to every day on the phone.
I definitely pay to see Eriksen with feeding Zlatan any day of the week on the field or in the canteen, whichever.
I just had a vision of Zlatan in one of those massive children chairs and
Eriksen wearing a chef's hat.
Before we get too ridiculous, I think we should also spend a few words for another Premier League import, which is Lukaku, who he's maybe doesn't have the star power of a Ronaldo or the pure arrogance of Zlatan, but I think his impact on Inter's play and generally his destruction of every defense that's placed in front of him in the league, he's probably one of the most devastating players I've seen, and Inter make fantastic use of him. His goal was he slices the first ball, and you're thinking, oh, that was the Lukaku we saw at Man United, but he has the presence to quickly turn around and take another quick stab at it. And I think this is the player who's playing with high confidence, and he's been trusted by a club, and he has I think the nation as a whole really, really rates him.
Yeah, I think he's one of the best strikers in Europe right now.
Definitely.
And last point on these two teams, I think we have to mention Spygate, really, don't we? So, Buzz, do you want to do the honours of explaining this one to us? Basically, Mihajlovic thinks he's got a rat in the camp.
Apparently, there's a mole inside the Bologna team, to the extent that Mihajlovic decided to test out a new tactic in one of his training sessions. And the next day, this tactic showed up in the media, and then he had his usual presser, and he said, I tricked you all. I'm never changing my tactics. I'm sticking to my ways. And I'm going to find this mole, and I'm going to stick him to the wall. And it's kind of slightly funny, but obviously it looks like it's slightly destabilizing the team. And it's worth noting that Mihajlovic, who'd actually previously beaten Inter at San Siro on 2 occasions, when he was asked about it after the game, he said that he was circling in on the mall, and he thought he knew who he was, and the guys' days were numbered. This is all very Agatha Christie.
It's Seria's response to the Wagatha Christie thing that's happening.
Yeah, either that or Bielsa's Spygate.
I personally, I want to take bets on who the mole is now. I'd love to know what's going on. Maybe it's Hickey, Kenny.
Either way,
he's leaking to the Daily Stars.
Maybe the tartan hat that he chose to wear to this fixture was in some way related to a disguise.
He's sending a signal.
On that note, I think that's all we've got time for in part 1. Just time for a couple of quick honourable mentions. Kenny, you want to tell us about Monza? In fact, this is an honourable mention to Monza for following your advice from earlier in the season.
I want to make clear that I didn't want to give myself an honourable mention here. I think it was one of you guys who put it in here. But yes, I'm delighted to see Balotelli going to Cagliari and Berlusconi's Monza. I said earlier, it wasn't earlier this season. It was the end of last season, when there was talk of him going to Como. That, with all due respect to them, I would find it very sad to see him playing in Serie C, and that surely a club in Serie A, or possibly one of the more ambitious clubs in Serie B, could snap him up. And I'm happy to see that that's the way it's gone. Certainly having Balotelli and Kevin Prince Boateng in the same team in Serie B is definitely going to be worth a watch.
And Monza need him. They're they're lying currently in 9th place and they just lost 3-0. So clearly they need goals. And it's worth noting that when Berlusconi took over Monza, he said that he wanted all his players to have neat haircuts and no tattoos. And now he's gone off and he signed Kevin Prince Boateng and Balotelli. So it's a strange change of pace, but I love it.
Speaking of strange changes of pace, Baz, you've got an honourable for us as well.
Yeah, I'd like to give honourable mention to the Nazionale Italiana Femminile captain Sara Gama, who is the Juventus centre-back, and she was recently elected as vice president of the Assa Calciatori, which is kind of the players' union in Italy. Obviously, she's the first woman to get to be in the role, and it's a great step forward, and it shows that in general, the whole women football movement is really advancing in Italy, and it's great to watch. It's great to see.
Right, yeah, thanks for that update. And Kenny, we've been giving quite a lot of dishonourables to shirts recently. For example, the Lazio away kit, which disgusted me again this week. But you've got an honourable for Sampdoria for their kit.
Yeah, an honourable to Sampdoria for their 120th anniversary shirt. I'm slightly disappointed that it doesn't actually have strings to kind of tie it up around the neck, like there was an Aston Villa one, I think, in the late 90s. But nonetheless, it's a very, very classy kit, and yeah, it suits them.
Good stuff. Thanks for that. That is all we've got time for in part one. We'll be back after this.
Hello, Serie A fan. Make Scudetto a part of your weekly football fix. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favourite listening platform, and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at ScudettoPod. We'd love to have you on the squad.
Welcome back. In part two, we will round up the rest of the weekend and talk about Italy's World Cup draw. But first, let's check in on the beers. Kenny, how's the Rauch and Roll going down this time?
Yeah, still good. I might start drinking more porters. It's nice and smoky. I like it. I'm a fan.
And Baz, you've been raving during the break about the Brewdog Cloudwater beer.
Possibly my new favorite beer. It's despite being a 6.8%er, it's going down really easy. Tastes great, very hoppy. I'm a big fan. I recommend it.
Good stuff. Yeah, the Merry Christmas IPA is growing on me a little bit. I mean, it is. Well, I mean, I've nearly finished drinking it.
How many stars out of 5?
It's going to get a star at least.
Wow.
Was it on 0 stars before?
Yeah, it was touch and go for a second as whether it would actually get drunk, but it's very nearly finished.
Mine would be a 3.5. Mine Rauch and Roll.
I'm getting this a 5. This is a...
I thought you were going to say 6.
Oh, you can't. I wish I could, but these are the rules. I don't make them.
Okay, good stuff. What's our first game? Oh yeah, Napoli have won 4-0 again, away to Crotone this time. But the result maybe flattered Napoli a bit. You've written here, Buzz.
It's a risultato bugiardo, as they would say in Italy, a lying score. Essentially, Crotone were quite in the game until the sending off. And I guess also helped by the fact that the weather conditions were pretty abysmal. It's quite funny because the commentators in Italy were constantly saying that the fact that Napoli were playing Petagna, who's over 100 kilos, was a big advantage in these conditions. I'm not sure what they're thinking, that he plants himself because he weighs more. But anyways, he did get a goal in the end, so I guess there was some truth to that. But Napoli struggled a little bit, and Crotone had quite a few chances. But once Insigne unblocked the game with his magic wand, it was pretty much over. And it's back-to-back 4-0 victories, which you have to say is always impressive. When Napoli are on, they're really on.
Insigne is definitely on as well now, isn't he? Form of his life.
Insigne is kind of becoming like Robin, where you know what he's going to do, and everyone knows what he's going to do. The defenders, the goalkeeper, the opposing manager, and yet he does it every game over and over. Scores, sets up goals with it, just cuts in on his foot and curls it in. And as it's unstoppable. He was doing it for Italy in the last international break as well. And I think we've already mentioned this, but he's a player who's truly matured under Gattuso and who's showing great leadership qualities. there was a time not so long ago where he was maybe on his way out, or definitely very contested by the Napoli fan base. But I think it would be hard to find someone who dislikes him at the moment, and rightfully so.
Yeah, and 70 goals for Napoli now, which makes him the 10th full-time scorer for the club, one behind podcast favourite Higuain and also Altafini. But some interesting comments, as you say, the whole team's playing very well, and exemplified by the Gattuso comments, who said, "What if he was in the Napoli team? He would have spent most of his time on the bench."
Yeah, I'm such a fan of Gattuso. He seems like he's just such a gent, really. I mean,
I'm sorry to interject here, but I do have to say that Gattuso underestimates himself here, because
that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
In that glorious Milan side, without a Gattuso player, the various Kaká, Pirlo, Shevchenko, they would have never been able to get what they did. And I think Kenny and I used to have a discussion whether we would prefer to have 11 Kakás or 11 Gattusos on the field. I'm not sure which side I was on this argument, but I think like it's a good argument to have. As I said, Gattuso is slightly downplaying his importance, both in a technical sense, but also from a leadership perspective to that team.
I think I'd want to see them both playing goal before I make it.
Kaká's a little bit taller, so maybe he'd be, but you never know.
Yeah, no. So Gattuso said basically that what he asks of these players, he could never do himself, and he said that he would. The saying in Italian doesn't translate so well into English, but basically, he'd spend a lot of time on the bench, and I mean. They are, like Boaz said, basically when they're on, they absolutely are on. And you also have to say that the moves that the Gattuso has made, I think he basically told the club to keep hold of Lozano, that he was going to get the best out of him, and he appears to have been true to his word. Bakayoko in midfield is hugely important to them. They've got a real identity. They've got quality all over the pitch, and they've got a superstar like Insigne. So yeah, just a gent though, Gattuso. The way his humility basically, and like Boaz said, I think he sells himself short. I think he has a tendency to blame himself for things that aren't necessarily his faults, and give credit elsewhere when perhaps he should be giving himself a bit more credit.
And perhaps that's a kind of a tactic, the same way Mourinho deflects all the attention on himself. Maybe Gattuso this is a way to kind of get the attention off his team. But something that should be mentioned is that Napoli have had these back-to-back 4-0 wins without arguably their gem up front, which is Osimhen, who got injured in an international game a few weeks ago, and he injured his shoulder, and there's kind of a little bit of a backwards and forwards with Aurelio De Laurentiis, because apparently the treatment that the player received just after the injury wasn't up to scratch. It's another one of those things where we'll have to keep an eye on it, because the player was supposed to be fit already, but clearly he's not quite there yet.
I thought this was one where Osimhen actually said on Twitter, this was reported by Tuttosport or someone, and I think Osimhen actually shared the article saying, except it's not true.
Well, all I know is that I saw some quotes attributed to De Laurentiis, where De Laurentiis is a firecracker as well, so he doesn't mind, and he was going off on. I've heard these quotes, so I should say I know these quotes actually happened, but he was going off on the international breaks and saying that he lost Osimhen and that he was badly treated. Now, I guess that's open to interpretation, but still, it's an ongoing situation.
Yeah, either way, honourable mention. I think we've given actually an honourable mention to this before, but to Osimhen's social media presence, it definitely seems like he's running that account himself. Anyway, any other points on this game, or should we move on to the Roma game? So a bit of a strange performance again for Roma. So another one, weather bird, this one, because it had obviously been raining heavily. Wasn't quite as flooded as some of the other pitches that we've seen in recent weeks, but definitely a wet one. And just a poor, well, just a strange game. I mean, Pedro getting sent off for a second yellow in the first half. What did you make of that decision and the sort of refereeing overall?
So I think when we were looking at the calendar before the weekend, I thought this game stood out more than any other game of the week, with perhaps the exception of the derby for sentimental reasons. But both Roma and Sassuolo are teams that are expected to play decent football, and both had a couple of bad results recently, but overall have been doing well this season. The game we got, actually, the result doesn't really reflect the gameplay, and there were 2 goals disallowed as well. So arguably 0-0 is a little bit harsh. It's impossible not to take into consideration the Pedro sending off that you mentioned, which probably affected Roma, who were slightly in the ascendancy before that. Slightly silly. You said it best. There was really no reason to make the second challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it is another game where you look at how Roma played, and you mentioned they were slightly in the ascendancy. It's tempting to say that they were a bit unlucky, but really, like, Pedro shouldn't be going into a challenge like that when he's already on a booking, and then Fonseca berating the referee at halftime and getting himself sent off as well.
Yeah.
I just think it really could have been better managed from Roma as a club.
I always find it ridiculous when managers get sent off anyways, because it's not like you're going to change the decision. It's posturing, and again, to leave the team for a whole 45 minutes without a manager is slightly silly. He had his reasons, and he seemed to think that particularly the first booking for Pedro was not a booking, but having seen the incident, I'm not sure what he's on about. Having said that, the refereeing performance as a whole was a little bit contentious. And while the big occasions like the sending off, but also the 2 disallowed goals were probably correct in the end, the overall running of the game was very, very problematic. And what it meant it was that both teams got really fired up, and the result was a very poor game.
It was a bit of an angry game from 2 clubs that you wouldn't normally associate with being angry teams, really. Bit of an odd one. Like Boaz said, I think we all expected something totally different from this game.
I think that is the influence of the referee that kind of didn't protect the star players, thus creating a situation where players were kind of leaving their foot in, being a little bit rougher on the high balls. It ruined what could have been a very good spectacle. Although the 2 disallowed goals were great goals, so for fans of the genre of goals that never were, you can add those 2 to the list.
Yeah, they were lovely.
And Sassuolo and Roma sitting obviously in 5th and 6th after that. But let's move on to a game that had a few more goals. Verona won, Cagliari won. But Verona hit the bar twice, Buzz.
Yeah, Verona hit the woodwork on 11 occasions this season, including twice in the same move in this game. A move that ended with the ball in the back of the net, but the player who scored it was offside. So calamitous all round. They did manage to score in the game. By all statistics, they really should have won that game. They had a few great opportunities, but Cagliari kind of came back and managed to score. Not much else to say about this game besides the fact that Cagliari have a severely COVID hit team and a little bit of an injury crisis. So it's slightly understandable that they're not putting in the most amazing performances. Although, as I keep saying, I'm not entirely convinced by Eusebio Di Francesco.
And finally, this just in, that Fiorentina under Prandelli have saved a point in the 99th minute, a 1-1 draw with Genoa.
Not good enough.
Haven't really had time to digest that one, but maybe we'll discuss Fiorentina more in the coming weeks. Just before we wrap up, let's briefly go over the World Cup draw. So this is for the World Cup qualifying group. Italy have drawn Switzerland, Bulgaria, Lithuania, and Northern Ireland. I think they should be fairly confident with that group. Switzerland's maybe a bit of a tough game.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say on the whole, Italy should be on the form that they've displayed under Mancini. They should be coming through that group quite comfortably. Switzerland, definitely the biggest challenge, though, a definite potential banana skin there. They've been in the last 16 of the last 3 major tournaments. So, not an easy game by any stretch. But other than that, Italy should be expecting to win that group relatively comfortably. I think we said that about all the Italian teams in the Champions League, though, as well. Not that they would be winning, but they should be coming through the groups quite comfortably. And that's not necessarily...
With the exception of Inter.
And Atalanta.
Hopefully Atalanta will get the job done.
Atalanta's still in the running, aren't they?
Well, Inter actually, bizarrely, are still in running as well after results last week. But I mean, getting back to Italy, yes, I agree with you, Oscar.
Good stuff. Right, I think that's all we've got time for. We can just round up a bit of the rest of the action in our honourable and dishonourable mentions. Kenny, you want to kick us off with a dishonourable for an outrageous dive?
Yeah, this is for in that game, the infamous game that we just spoke about, Roma Sassuolo, Maxime Lopez's outrageous dive for which he was booked. But it's often said that players go down as if they look like they were shot. He absolutely looked like he was shot. It looked like it was a sniper. But rightly booked for that. And,
phenomenal stuff.
And yeah, it was quite dramatic.
I'll give an honourable for a game we've already spoken about as well. Zielinski's nutmeg leading up to Napoli's first goal. Absolutely lovely stuff, and good to see him back to full fitness. I think he missed a couple of games for COVID, and then one while he was still recovering. Hasn't maybe quite looked the same since, but back to his best at the weekend.
He's a lovely player.
You want to give an honourable for a game we didn't get to, Benevento Parma?
Yeah, I have to give a big shout out to whomever does the editing for the various TV shows and also the Serie A YouTube channel for this game, because I'm not sure how they found 4 minutes of footage to show. There were 2 shots on target in the whole 90 minutes, and these shots on target were from miles out anyways. Generally very poor, and you have to expect a little bit better from both teams who are usually on the attacking front.
And another one that we didn't get to, Lazio won 2-1 away at Spezia, and an honourable from that game was Nzola's goal.
Generally, it was despite the rain, it was a very entertaining game, and there was a nice free kick. I was going to say a lovely free kick from SMS, Sergei Milinkovic-Savic, but Kenny seems to think that the goalkeeper is to blame. So I downgraded from a wonderful goal to a good goal. And also Immobile yet again scored a nice 1-on-1. But despite losing, the goal of the game comes from Nzola for Spezia, who cuts in and curls a great ball in. Really worth checking out this goal. It's a lovely shot.
I'm wrapping it up with a nice blanket dishonourable mention for the city of Florence.
Yeah. It kind of wraps up this whole podcast nicely because, again, due to the weather, the conditions in Florence were particularly bad. And footage was going around social media showing that the Artemio Franchi was literally leaking through huge cracks in the stadium, that there's kind of plants growing in it. It's a stadium in disrepair. And we often kind of joked about Comiso, and we've had a slight laugh at his expense in the past. But in his credit, they've come out and they've said, we're willing to put money into a new stadium. We're wanting to invest. We want to have a new facilities. And they've just been met with bureaucracy and red tape. And it's just a shame to see one of the classic stadiums in Serie A fall to such a low level.
Yeah, well, I think like Rocco Comiso said, I mentioned this on one of our podcasts. I'm not sure if it was in one of the pilot episodes, but yeah, it's been around Serie A for a long time, obviously. But like he said, it's not the Colosseum. Let him redevelop it.
Particularly as he's willing to put the money in himself.
And on that note, let me just urge you to subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your audio. We will speak to you next week. Until then, enjoy the football.
Che sta decretando lo scudetto del Milan in questo preciso istante. La Juventus è campione d'Italia questa data, il 6 maggio. La Roma è campione d'Italia.